friends. We are deep wintering here in Montreal, so I thought it's time for a deep wintering poem. I realize I haven't yet read Anne Carson and story time. So today I'm going to read a poem from Glass, Irony, and God by Anne Carson. And I'm not really one to pick favorites, but if I had to bring one writer to live with me on a proverbial desert island, it would definitely be Anne Carson. Though, as you'll see in this titular poem, the glass essay that I'm going to read, it would be more like a snowy moor. In this case, the moors of the Canadian Shield. And I won't give you much info on Carson because she's sort of infamous for writing on the back of her books like a one-liner biography, which just says, Anne Carson was born in Canada and teaches ancient Greek for a living. And I want to respect her MO and just give you that. She's a classicist. That is her bread and butter. And she also writes essays and poetry and operas and all manner of things. And this book was published in the 90s, in 95, I believe. And the only image I have to show you is this cover painting. It's kind of hard to see, but it's actually painted by Carson. And it's called Volcano Talk. Just a bit of a head nod to her, probably her most famous book, Autobiography of Red. Features many volcanoes. Beautiful book. And I will say that though I read a range of stuff, and a lot of it is very kid-friendly, that this one is not so. There's quite some raw imagery, so I just say parental discretion to my dear parents out there, my dear kiddos. And without further ado, I will begin with the glass essay. I can hear little clicks inside my dream. Night drips its silver tap down the back. At 4 a.m. I wake, thinking of the man who left in September. His name was Law. My face in the bathroom mirror has white streaks down it. I rinse the face and return to bed. Tomorrow, I am going to visit my mother. She lives on a moor in the north. She lives alone. Spring opens like a blade there. I travel all day on trains and bring a lot of books. Some for my mother, some for me, including the collected works of Emily Bronte. This is my favorite author. Also my main fear, which I mean to confront. Whenever I visit my mother, I feel I am turning into Emily Bronte, my lonely life around me like a moor, my ungainly body stumping over the mud flats with a look of transformation that dies when I come in the kitchen door. What meat is it, Emily, we need? 3 silent women at the kitchen table. My mother's kitchen is dark and small, but out the window there is the moor, paralyzed with ice. It extends as far as the eye can see, over flat miles to a solid unlit white sky. Mother and I are chewing lettuce, carefully. The kitchen wall clock emits a ragged low buzz that jumps once a minute over the 12. I have Emily, page 216, propped open on the sugar bowl, but I am covertly watching my mother. 1,000 questions hit my eyes from the inside. My mother is studying her lettuce. I turn to page 217. Quote, "In my flight through the kitchen, I knocked over Hareton, who was hanging a litter of puppies from a chair back in the doorway. It is as if we have all been lowered into an atmosphere of glass. Now and then a remark trails through the glass. Taxes on the back lot. Not a good melon. Too early for melons. Hairdresser in town found God. Closes shop every Tuesday. Mice in the tea towel drawer again. Little pellets. Chew off the corners of the napkins. If they knew what paper napkins cost nowadays. Rain tonight. Rain tomorrow. That volcano in the Philippines at it again. What's her name? Anderson died. No, not Shirley, the opera singer. Negress. Cancer. Not eating your garnish. You don't like pimento? Out the window I can see dead leaves ticking over the flat land and dregs of snow scarred by pine filth. At the middle of the moor where the ground goes down into a depression, the ice has begun to unclench. Black water comes curdling up like anger. My mother speaks suddenly. That psychotherapy's not doing you much good, is it? You aren't getting over him. My mother has a way of summing things up. She never liked law much, but she liked the idea of me having a man and getting on with life. While he's a taker and you're a giver, I hope it works out, was all she said after she met him. Give and take were just words to me at the time. I had not been in love before. It was like a wheel rolling downhill. But early this morning, while Mother slept and I was downstairs reading the part in Wuthering Heights where Heathcliff clings at the lattice in the storm, sobbing, come in, to the ghost of his heart's darling, I fell on my knees on the rug and sobbed too. She knows how to hang puppies, thought Emily. It isn't like taking an aspirin, you know, I answer feebly. Dr. Haw says grief is a long process. She frowns. What does it accomplish, all that raking up the past? Oh, I spread my hands. I prevail. I look her in the eye. She grins. Yes, you do. Whacher. W-H-A-C-H-E-R. Watcher. Emily's habitual spelling of this word has caused confusion. For example, in the first line of the poem printed, tell me, weather, is it winter? In the Shakespeare Head edition. But watcher is what she wrote. Watcher is what she was. She watched God and humans and moor and wind and open night. She watched eyes, stars, inside, outside, actual weather. She watched the bars of time which broke. She watched the poor core of the world wide open. To be a watcher is not a choice. There is nowhere to get away from it, no ledge to climb up to. Like a swimmer who walks out of the water at sunset, shaking the drops off, it just flies open. To be a watcher is not in itself sad or happy, although she uses these words in her verse as she uses the emotions of sexual union in her novel, grazing with euphemism the work of watching. But it has no name. It is transparent. Sometimes she calls it thou. Emily is in the parlor brushing the carpet, records Charlotte in 1828. Unsociable even at home and unable to meet the eyes of strangers when she ventured out, Emily made her awkward way across days and years whose bareness appalls her biographers. This sad, stunted life, says one, uninteresting, unremarkable, racked by disappointment and despair, says another. She could have been a great navigator if she'd been male, suggests a third. Meanwhile, Emily continued to brush into the carpet the question, why cast the world away? For someone hooked up to thou, the world may have seemed a kind of half-finished sentence. But in between the neighbor who recalls her coming in from a walk on the moors with her face lit up by divine light, and the sister who tells us Emily never made a friend in her life, is a space where the little raw soul slips through. It goes skimming the deep keel like a storm petrel, out of sight. The little raw soul was caught by no one. She didn't have friends, children, sex, religion, marriage, success, a salary, or a fear of death. She worked in total 6 months of her life at a school in Halifax and died on the sofa at home at 2 p.m. on a winter afternoon in her 31st year. She spent most of the hours of her life brushing the carpet, walking the moor, or watching. She says it gave her peace. Quote, all tight and right, in which condition it is to be hoped we shall all be this day 4 years, she wrote in her diary paper of 1837. Yet her poetry from beginning to end is concerned with prisons, vaults, cages, bars, curbs, bits, bolts, fetters, locked windows, narrow frames, aching walls. Why all the fuss? Asks one critic. She wanted liberty. Well, didn't she have it? A reasonably satisfactory home life, a most satisfactory dream life. Why all this beating of wings? What was this cage invisible to us, which she felt herself to be confined in? Well, there are many ways of being held prisoner, I am thinking as I stride over the moor. As a rule, after lunch, Mother has a nap, and I go out for a walk. The bare blue trees and bleached wooden sky of April carve into me with knives of light. Something inside it reminds me of childhood. It is the light of the stalled time after lunch, when clocks tick and hearts shut, and fathers leave to go back to work, and mothers stand at the kitchen sink pondering something they never tell. You remember too much, my mother said to me recently. Why hold on to all that? And I said, where can I put it down? She shifted to a question about airports. Crops of ice are changing to mud all around me as I push on across the moor, warmed by drifts from the pale blue sun. On the edge of the moor, our pines dip and coast in breezes from somewhere else. Perhaps the hardest thing about losing a lover is to watch the year repeat its days. It is as if I could dip my hand down into time and scoop up blue and green lozenges of April heat a year ago in another country. I can feel that other day running underneath this one like an old videotape. Here we go fast around the last corner up the hill to his house, shadows of limes and roses blowing in the car window and music spraying from the radio and him singing and touching my left hand to his lips. Law lived in a high blue room from which he could see the sea. Time in its transparent loops as it passes beneath me now still carries the sound of the telephone in that room and traffic far off and doves under the window chuckling coolly and his voice saying, "You beauty." I can feel that beauty's heart beating inside mine as she presses into his arms in the high blue room. No, I say aloud. I force my arms down through air which is suddenly cold and heavy as water, and the videotape jerks to a halt like a glass slide under a drop of blood. I stop and turn and stand into the wind, which now plunges towards me over the moor. When Law left, I felt so bad I thought I would die. This is not uncommon. I took up the practice of meditation. Each morning I sat on the floor in front of my sofa and chanted bits of old Latin prayers. De profundis clamavi ad te Domine. Each morning a vision came to me. Gradually I understood that these were naked glimpses of my soul. I called them nudes. Nude number 1. Woman alone on a hill. She stands into the wind. It is a hard wind slanting from the north. Long flaps and shreds of flesh rip off the woman's body and lift and blow away on the wind, leaving an exposed column of nerve and blood and muscle calling mutely through lipless mouth. It pains me to record this. I am not a melodramatic person. But soul is hewn in a wild workshop, as Charlotte Bronte says of Wuthering Heights. Charlotte's preface to Wuthering Heights is a publicist's masterpiece. Like someone carefully not looking at a scorpion crouched on the arm of the sofa, Charlotte talks firmly and calmly about the other furniture of Emily's workshop. About the inexorable spirit, stronger than a man, simpler than a child. The cruel illness, pain no words can render. The autonomous end. She sank rapidly, she made haste to leave us. And about Emily's total subjection to a creative project she could neither understand nor control, and for which she deserves no more praise nor blame than if she had opened her mouth, quote, to breathe lightning. The scorpion is inching down the arm of the sofa while Charlotte continues to speak helpfully about lightning and other weather we may expect to experience when we enter Emily's electrical atmosphere. It is, quote, a horror of great darkness that awaits us there. But Emily is not responsible. Emily was in the grip. Having formed these beings, she did not know what she had done, says Charlotte, of Heathcliff and Earnshaw and Catherine. Well, there are many ways of being held prisoner. The scorpion takes a light spring and lands on our left knee, as Charlotte concludes, on herself she had no pity. Pitiless, too, are the heights which Emily called wuthering because of their bracing ventilation and a north wind over the edge. Watching a north wind grind the moor that surrounded her father's house on every side formed of a kind of rock called millstone grit, taught Emily all she knew about love and its necessities. An angry education that shapes the way her characters use one another. My love for Heathcliff, says Catherine, resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Necessary? I notice the sun is dimmed and the afternoon air is sharpening. I turn and start to recross the moor towards home. What are the imperatives that hold people like Catherine and Heathcliff together and apart, like pores blown into hot rock and then stranded out of reach of one another when it hardens? What kind of necessity is that? The last time I saw Law was a black night in September. Autumn had begun. My knees were cold inside my clothes. A chill fragment of moon rose. He stood in my living room and spoke without looking at me. Not enough spin on it, he said, of our 5 years of love. Inside my chest, I felt my heart snap into 2 pieces, which floated apart. By now I was so cold it was like burning. I put out my hand to touch his. He moved back. I don't want to be sexual with you, he said. Everything goes crazy. But now he was looking at me. Yes, I said as I began to remove my clothes. Everything gets crazy. When nude, I turned my back because he likes the back. He moved on to me. Everything I know about love and its necessities I learned in that one moment when I found myself thrusting my little burning red backside like a baboon at a man who no longer cherished me. There was no area of my mind not appalled by this action, no part of my body that could have done otherwise. But to talk of mind and body begs the question. Soul is the place stretched like a surface of millstone grit between body and mind, where such necessity grinds itself out. Soul is what I kept watch on all that night. Law stayed with me. We lay on top of the covers as if it weren't really a night of sleep and time, caressing and singing to one another in our made-up language like the children we used to be. That was a night that centered heaven and hell, as Emily would say. We tried to fuck, but he remained limp, although happy. I came again and again, each time accumulating lucidity, until at last I was floating high up near the ceiling, looking down on the 2 souls clasped there on the bed with their mortal boundaries visible around them like lines on a map. I saw the lines harden. He left in the morning. It is very cold walking into the long, scraped April wind. At this time of year, there is no sunset, just some movements inside the light, and then a sinking away.